Hey fellow nerds, I need your help figuring something out. You see, normally what happens is that a civilization first figures out how to farm. They move from their nomadic, pastoral, or hunter gatherer society into villages that do farming. And eventually, once it gains another layer of complexity to a civilization figure out a writing system. So that's how normally a civilization develops. And then there is the Vedic civilization. They were a pastoral tribe that were nomadic and hadn't settled any city, but yet they wrote. By the time the first Veda came into existence, there were no kingdoms, and yet they wrote. That almost never happens. Okay, let's first define what a pastoral nomadic tribe is. They are people who move from pasture to find better grazing land for their cattle. They are considered more advanced than hunter-gatherer societies, but they're usually considered significantly less advanced than settled farmer societies. By the time the first Veda was written down, they were still a pastoral tribe, and the first kingdoms were just starting to form. Rig Veda begins with the chronicling of a battle, a great battle between 10 kings, of which 2 of them allied together to beat everyone else. These kings were the leaders of the Bharat tribe and the Puru tribe, and together they formed the Kuru kingdom, or in other words, Kurukshetra. Now, whether Mahabharata is true or not, or whether Krishna actually came on earth, or all the over-the-top things actually happened in that battle, that is up to you to decide. Anyway, since it was the Bharat tribe that won, that's why most Indians call themselves the descendant of the Bharat tribe, or Bharti. Now, the only text that survived from this Vedic era, which lasted from 1500 BC to 500 BC, were the Vedas. And while they are not exactly a secular source that is about history, they can still be used as somewhat a window into the culture of the time. They define a culture that seemed to have a history of many hundred years before. They usually lived around the area called the Sapt Sindhu, or the 7 rivers. They had kings and armies, and they fought with infantries and cavalries and chariots. Socially, women were seen as equal to men, and child marriages were seen as a sin. And while there was a caste system, it was primarily based on the work that someone did rather than their birth, as would be the case with latter Indian kingdom. There were 4 major tribes during this time: the Bharat, the Purus, the Matsyas, and the Yadus. They prayed to gods that signified forces of nature, like Indra for lightning and weather, and Varun for water, and Agni for fire. They did not have idol worship or temples. They usually did what is called a yagya to appease the gods. But at the same time, there was also animal sacrifice. It is stated in Rig Veda that a king that sacrifices a horse before a war goes on to win that war. What they practiced was something similar to Hinduism, but it really wasn't. For example, an earlier version of Vishnu and Shiva were mentioned, but they were minor deities when compared to the might of Indra. Sometimes Vishnu and Indra were conflated as the same deity, and instead of Shiva, he was called Rudra, which was a completely different character, even though that's one of his many names. When I brought up this major change in the lead deity to a religious person, I got a very interesting theory from them. You see, these people were pastoralists who were at the mercy of the elements. So it was in their interest to appease these elements. So their gods were these elemental gods. And then when they settled into cities and kingdoms, they got the time to look within themselves and find the connection they had with the universe. And so the other latter gods came up in prominence. I like this theory. Anyway, with time, these pastoral nomads started settling into kingdoms that grew ever complex and larger in size. And they moved further eastwards towards Ganga and settled multiple cities there. They mixed together with local agrarian societies that existed before them and formed a new composite culture that is the Indian culture. The significance of their king grew over time, from that of a tribe leader to that of a king. The last three Vedas were composed around the time after they had settled into kingdoms. This was the civilization that had storied cities like Mathura, Hastinapur, Indraprasth and Kashi. And the largest amongst them was Mathura. And if you know your Mahabharata, you would know that Mathura was actually the capital of the Yadu kingdom. By the time of Atharvaveda, the last Veda, the kingdoms had reached their zenith. The Atharvaveda uses the kings of Kurukshetra as an example of excellent governance. Eventually, more kingdoms to the west and to the south would start to pop up, and a tribe or a kingdom from outside the Vedic world would come in and sack Kurukshetra. This would reduce their power significantly. Eventually, these Vedic kingdoms would multiply and grow in size, giving way to the Mahajanpads. Kurukshetra would be one of the kingdoms amongst them, and it grew less significant in time and shared its limelight with 15 other bigger kingdoms. We will talk about the Mahajanpads in the next video. They are one of the most fascinating parts of Indian history. In just 250 years, India grew from some small kingdoms around the Ganga Valley to dozens of kingdoms stretching all across the Indian subcontinent. And it was then that India gained its reputation for being rich beyond imagination. And it was then that the Vedic religion split into the three religions of Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism. Not a lot of people talk about this time period. I'm excited to cover it, and so should you be. See you next time.